Van manages sales and specializes in providing customer service, technical support, and composting enterprise for in-vessel composting systems. Our time is limited, so we're going to wait till the end to see if we have any time for questions, but we can later discuss them. We have another meetup that's going to be scheduled for Thursday, February 17th, that we could talk more in detail about the Earth Cube and our own interests and projects. All right, so I'm going to switch this over to Van, who's going to tell us about the Earth Cube and how it works, including with pet waste.
Hey, thank you, Stephanie. This is awesome, and definitely, yeah, I may have you chime in here because I no doubt will have good insights into, because you're using these day in, day out for pet waste. And so thanks for having me in to chat about the Earth Cube system. I do think it's a great system for pet waste. It's really, we use this system a lot for food waste as well, which is another side kind of conversation, is mixing the two. And that whole question of getting enough energy in your feedstocks, but that's just a tangent. So let's jump right into it. So what is the Earth Cube? The Earth Cube is an aerated in-vessel composting system. It's a completely enclosed vessel so that gives you an ability to prevent access by animals and control odors and prevent insects. You can either do mechanical aeration or natural aeration. You can see here the blower on the top. This is for mechanically aerated system. And you can also aerate it naturally, just using natural convection. Mixing is optional. Sometimes I often will run an Earth Cube as essentially an aerated static vessel. But you can also do mixing as well. And that's something that's be interesting to hear Stephanie's perspective on the whole mixing piece, because that will speed your process. So that's a balance. This is based on an IBC platform. So basically we're talking about an intermediate bulk containers that are tend to be available for holding all different types of commercial bulk liquids. So that's the platform that the Earth Cube is based around. And what we do is fabricate IBCs to make them into Earth Cubes or teach other people how to do that. So let's go move on here. So this is showing an Earth Cube in process. So an Earth Cube is designed to facilitate an aerobic hot composting process. So aerobic is all about oxygen. So it's about getting oxygen to the microbes. And with a correct recipe, your compost temperature should be in the range of 120 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And it really is all about recipe. One of the downsides with being the manufacturer of a system like this is people have a tendency to view this kind of system as a magical device. It's actually not magical at all. We're simply composting inside of a box and an aerated container, and that gives you specific advantages. And there's also specific limitations because of that. So just really knowing this is still natural, regular hot composting that we're doing here. All right, so how is it that the Earth Cube is great for pet waste composting? Well, there's a number of things. One is the Earth Cube is what I call a non-draining design. You've got a sealed floor, so there's no way for liquids to get out of this system unless you drain the liquids out through the port at the bottom. You can also lock the system from a security standpoint to really have good control over what's happening. And a lot of this is perceptual, the idea that people, this is pet waste, so people don't want to feel like they're being exposed to that. So this idea of being able to have good control over a bunch of pet poo is something that I think people really find appealing. And also I found, having worked with Earth Cubes for years and managed multiple systems on a daily basis, that I've gotten to where I do very little mixing in an Earth Cube. And that's a real advantage, as you might imagine, for composting pet food. All right, so lockable door for security. The Earth Cubes also employ a biofilter on the roof. And so you have redundant biofiltration, which means your first line of defense is to cover your pet waste thoroughly in the vessel. That's what's called a biocover. And then there's a supplementary biofilter on top that you put wood chips or the like in to give you a second layer of odor control. And those wood chips help to filter the odors. I mentioned about controlling liquids. Also with an earth cube, you can move the system around with a fork truck or a pallet jack if you have that capability. So the capacity of the earth cube, it can receive up to 50 pounds per day total feedstocks. So that's about 30 pounds of pet manure, or about 1 5-gallon bucket of pet manure, and 20 pounds of wood chip, leaves, shredded paper, or other type of bulk, carbon-based bulking agent. So that's a pretty standard recipe. So it's really, as you can see, 1-to-1 by volume, and it's not quite that by weight. So that's basically the recipe. Cat litter is another interesting topic. There might be questions around that. Depending on what the cat litter is, that litter may serve as its own bulking agent, or it may be too fine, and you may need to add something with more chunk, like a wood chip, in order to get a good recipe. So that's something we can talk about more. Dimensions of the earth cube. This is roughly a 4-foot cube, 48 by 40 by 45 on the outside, but smaller, 46 by 38 by 38 on the inside, or about 1.4 cubic yards. And that's 275 gallons, and that's when it's filled to the very tippy top, which I have done before, but sometimes folks will just fill it to like 250 gallons. This is showing the inside. I'm just going to whip through these and show you some different things. This is the aeration pipe inside of the earth cube. It goes right down the middle. And again, this can be just natural ventilation, or you can have an air pump pumping air into the compost. And I would say, generally speaking, the mechanical aeration is going to give you more air. It's going to help oxygenate your compost. And so it's recommended, but I compost all the time with natural ventilation in an earth cube, and it also works fine. So both will work. One of the key features with an earth cube is the lever bar, which is hard for folks to understand. People have asked me, well, why don't you make it so you can just take the whole front out of the earth cube? And actually that would be a terrible idea, because the lever bar is what when eventually you have to get this compost out. And the lever bar turns a difficult lifting task into an easy lifting task by basically creating a fulcrum. So you can lever your pitchfork on the lever bar, and that makes the lifting task a lot easier. So you're in an upright position, and you've reduced your weight that you're lifting literally in half. So it makes it way easier to discharge compost from an earth cube. I have also had customers that have literally used fork trucks to dump out earth cubes, which is, you have to be careful doing that, but it is possible to dump them out mechanically as well. Here's showing mixing with an auger. This is typically with an earth cube, we provide these mixing augers that you would attach to a power drill, and you can do blending in your earth cube. In my case, I'm not sure if I would even advocate for that. It's going to be yucky work, and I'm not sure if it's necessary. It just depends on how quickly you're trying to move compost through your system, and certainly mixing is going to speed that process. Temperature monitoring is a big success factor. Maintaining your hot compost temperatures in that 120 to 140 degree realm is really key to this working well. If you have low temperatures in your earth cube, something's not working right, and the microbes aren't happy, essentially. Here's showing the earth cube biofilter, where you can add wood chips into into the biofilter on top of the cube. I mentioned the recipe. 1-to-1 by volume is a general rule of thumb. For every bucket of pet manure, add at least 1 bucket of bulking agent, wood chip, leaves, etc. And if the pet manure is wet, additional bulking agent may be necessary, sometimes 2-to-1 or even 3-to-1 by volume. One of our rules for composting is when in doubt, add more bulking agent, because the material will still compost well at 2-to-1 or even 3-to-1. So if you're balancing out how much material you're putting in the system, but what you don't want to do, the classic and most critical error that we'll see people do, and this applies more to food waste composting, but in both cases, is to not put enough bulking agent in there. And then the material can go anaerobic on you and paste and become very unpleasant. And so we want to avoid that. So you can always just make sure you get enough bulking agent in there. So here are some recommended bulking agents. Could be wood shavings, could work very well actually. Wood chips, 1 inch minus, or with a fiber length of about 1 inch long. Leaves work very well. Horse manure and bedding is actually a great addition. Chopped weeds, as long as they're less than 6 inches in length. Sawdust, shredded paper, and straw. So let's see here. Adding pet waste in the earth cube. So this is very important to me. And I learned this from Joseph Jenkins. This is from the Human Manure Handbook. This is for human waste, but I think it's just, there's a lot. It's a very simple idea, but very powerful. So when I work with manures in a compost pile, what I do is when I'm adding more material, I'm digging a hole in the center of the compost pile and I'm pulling the cover material to the sides. Then I add new feedstocks into the core, into the hot core of the compost pile. So your material that you're going to want to have pathogen reduction happen in, you're adding to the core. So the alternative, what a lot of people do is they'll just pile the material in and it will, pyramid. So you'll have a pile of material, you put new material in, it'll run to the sides of the vessel. That's not what you want, because then you've got pathogenic material on the edge of your vessel where they're not going to get as well sanitized by the composting process. So adding those new feedstocks in the core and then covering well with clean bulking agent, as I've described. This is really the magic right here of a happy compost process. And that's really, for the most part, all the mixing I do. I don't do any other mixing in an earth cube because, particularly in this case with pet waste, it's a yucky job. And so I'm doing some mixing by pulling that center of the pile out, digging a hole, putting fresh materials in and covering it up. So this is like the most important thing I feel like I have to share today. How to use this system effectively so you get everything an opportunity to really be sanitized in that hot environment for pathogen reduction. Okay, correct maintaining hot temperatures. Here's how you do it, because it's possible to have your microbes not be happy. Correct recipe. You need to have your aggregate bulk density below 900 pounds per yard. That means a full bucket of mixed compost needs to weigh less than 22.5 pounds. What that means is if your bucket weighs, of your mixed compost, including your bulking agent, if it weighs more than 22.5 pounds, there's no way for those microbes to get enough oxygen in order to be happy. So this is a classic problem. They're putting just pure pet waste in or too much pet waste, and the compost is too heavy, can't get air through it. Your temperatures will drop. Similar issue here, correct moisture balance. You can have a compost pile that's either too wet or too dry. So we use this wrung out sponge test, which I recommend a glove for this, or a plastic bag or something like that, because this is poop, right? So squeeze a handful. You want to have a few drops of water drip out of that compost. You don't want it streaming out, and you don't want that material to be dry. So it's the wrung out sponge test. It's not a wet sponge, not a dry sponge. That's that 50 to 60% moisture content that we're looking for. And then another common thing is making sure you have some chunk in your bulking agent. Wood chips work great, leaves work very well. Sawdust doesn't work as well. I work a lot with just human manure and sawdust, and that does not breathe very well. So make sure you have some sort of chunk in your bulking agent. Expected retention time. I would say a minimum of 21 to 30 days in the vessel. The idea with an earth cube is intended to get that material through the what I call yucky stage. That's a scientific and engineering term there. And it just means that's what this vessel is for. You're not going to try and do the complete composting process in vessel. So if you can leave it in there for longer, definitely do that. But then followed by 60 days of curing minimum. How do you know when it's ready to remove that material? You should have no observable manure, balls, and the compost should be smelling good. If it's not ready, put it back. And so it's certainly been the case that a lot of times you'll find your more finished compost is going to be at the bottom and in the back. So sometimes you might have to pull out some material that's not ready, put it in one wheelbarrow, and then get the material, other material out that's ready to pull out, and then put that material back that's not ready to go. Success factors: stick to recipe religiously. Always, always, always cover your new additions thoroughly so you don't get into bug issues and odor issues. Plan ahead with a supply of bulking agent. People often in the wintertime will run out of bulking agent, or their bulking agent is all soaking wet. And if you've got wet pet waste and you add wet bulking agent, you've got a mess. So keep your bulking agent dry, particularly in wet weather. Track your compost temperatures. Control who adds input. I wouldn't just have anybody do that. I would have one person or maybe a small team responsible for adding all your inputs, and track what you're adding to your system. All of these things are ways that you can stay out of trouble. Let's see here. Common pet waste questions. Biobags, we could talk the whole time today on biobags. I've had mixed success. I hear, Stephanie, that you've had some success, which I think is fantastic. It's tough in an EarthCube environment because it's such a small composting pile relative to big municipal composting. So it's challenging. Again, getting that material into the hot core will certainly help. And also, same thing with newspaper and paper products in general. You want to just avoid, certainly by all means, they are great and can go in there. You just want to avoid having the material be too dominated by paper, because that tends to lay really flat in a compost pile and tends to paste and not hold airspace. So you just have to watch out for how much paper you're putting in. Let's see, why don't I just say, Stephanie, you want to jump in and say anything there about biobags and what your experience has been? And
so the key thing we found with bags that are compostable is you need to actually get a hole in them before you throw them in, because what happens is the bag itself, it just needs to be punctured in some way before it can go in, so it can get that air coming in, and then it'll really break down. Also, the bags, the waste inside tends to get really wet inside, so you do want to put in extra bulk stuff just to dry it out a bit when you put it in.
Great.
The other thing is, so we do, we talk about bulking agents and everyone has different strategies. We use a bit less. And I think the main difference between human waste and dog waste is left out in the weather before we can get it. So a lot of times we'll be scooping, and if it was a rainy day, everything we collect is just completely soaked in muddy. Or if it's really hot out, everything's like really, really dried out. So when it's really dried out, we actually don't add anything, no bulking agent, we just throw it in because it's already in these hard little pieces. When it's really, really wet, we do add bulking agent, but we only might do like a 1/2-to-1 ratio at the most, if it's like, or maybe a 1-to-1 if it's like really soaking wet. But the difference is we do pre-mix it with everything. So we'll pre-mix the waste with the bulking agents before and make it all kind of into smaller pieces as much as we can. So each piece is covered in pine shavings or whatever it be before we put it into the composter. So that's kind of our strategy there. We do get it up to 150 degrees. And it cooks for about 3 weeks, and then we leave it in for another 2-3 weeks, and then we take it out, and we do cure it for an entire year. That's mainly because that's what the state wants us to do right now. But we've tested it at 3 months and it was fine of curing. So yeah.
No, that's really all really great points for sure. I'd love to, and you're going to be presenting soon, right, Stephanie, on you're going to be.
Sorry, my dogs are barking. Oh my God, guys. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There's probably dogs barking in most.
Go ahead. I'll just be right here.
So yeah, I'd love to hear more about how you're doing mixing in your operation. That would be great to hear more. So let's go, and then I'll get finished up. We can see if there's time for questions. So we sell EarthCubes pre-made, either fully clad cubes or what I call naked cubes. I'll show you that. And then we also sell do-it-yourself kits so that you can fabricate EarthCubes locally. And we provide instruction and support and coaching for people to make their own earth cubes from scratch. So we're really the earth cube is based on an open source model. There's nothing that we're patenting in the system. We are just here to teach people to fish, essentially. And or in this case, compost dog poop. So this is a couple of snapshots of the naked earth cube where it's just this reflective insulation on the exterior. So that's just some examples of that. We've done ones with roofs over earth cubes, and there's lots of different experiments. We're always up to trying crazy experiments. This is some clad earth cubes with a client of ours in Colorado. And so with that, I think I'm going to finish up and just see if there are questions.
Val, one of the people here, I think, is Ryan Torres too. Go ahead, Ruth.
I was wondering how you actually get the contents out.
Right. Remember I showed the lever bar? And so typically it's a pitchfork, and typically it's hand shoveled out. So it's that piece of manual labor to pitchfork the material out of the vessel. So it takes a strong person. It's maybe about an hour of work, something along those lines. And I have had clients, particularly with naked cubes, design them so you can remove the door and dump them out mechanically, like with a fork truck. That's certainly been done if you want to avoid that labor. But I'm an advocate of, we don't do enough manual labor in our culture a lot. So I'm a big advocate for that's a part of your gym membership. And what's nice about the cube again is that you've got that bar there to brace against, so that the lifting is in a good position. And it's actually way easier to get material out of a cube than it is from moving a pile on the ground.
And I had one other question.
Yeah.
So in a community setting like the photo at the moment, where's the bulking agent kept? Like, how is that stored? Or
yeah, we don't dictate that with this system. I imagine it, but it depends. It depends. Like sometimes people will, if it's a wet environment, they'll keep the bulking agent in like in a trash can or a rolling toter or in buckets. That's what I often do, is I keep mine in the wet weather, covered and in a bucket to keep it dry, sometimes under a tarp on a pile on the ground. So it just really depends on your space and your layout. So we definitely don't dictate that by the system design. And also, Stephanie, feel free to jump in if there's anything that you want to share about answering questions.
Yeah, we had like just a cheap shed that we had that I inherited. So I just use that for bulking agent. The other thing I forgot to mention is we do mix. So it is very physical on the land. So we do completely mix, because what we notice also about pet waste, especially when it's wet, when it holds that, when it's so much liquid from like a rainy day or whatever, all that liquid is just going straight to the bottom.
Yeah.
So when we mix, we have to kind of, it's almost like if you could rotate the tote, that would be awesome. But since it's all mechanical, you just have to mix and get that bottom portion up onto the top. Just to make sure the wetness at the bottom doesn't get too wet. Because then when you go to most of it will compost, but then once you get to the end, it just is going to be a wet mess at the bottom.
So how do you mix, Stephanie?
Pitchfork. And yeah, we use that leverage bar all the time.
Yep.
And it's just, it could take us 15 minutes up to a half hour if it's really, really full. I mean, we do mix when it gets full, so it's just very labor intensive right now. But I do have two other people that now help. Well, technically at a time, it's one person that helps me at the land. So our first portion is mixing, and then we go through the waste and pre-mix that too. So we have a whole process.
It's a whole process.
Yeah, I mean, just because pet waste, if it is wet, it just tends to just want to pile up and start going back to mud. So it's like you're constantly just wanting to make sure all the pieces are staying separate, so they're not coming back together to create like a mud pie. And like I said, that's a big difference between human waste, because we do have a compost toilet on the land. So I have some human waste that we experiment with. and it's just nice. It's so different because, you know, it's been covered, you know, it hasn't been, the weather hasn't affected it, and we put in sawdust every time you go. So it's all layered up and you can just throw it in and it's beautiful. Dog waste, it's just out in the elements before we get to it. Or if it's in the pet waste station, bags where they get really wet. So you're just constantly dealing with all these different types of wet stages of waste that you have to kind of go through.
I can agree with so much of that. And I want to just add a couple of things. It is true that in an earth cube, the wet material does tend to get pulled to the bottom. And I do recommend regularly draining those excess liquids out of the system, because they're really difficult to get them, you know, all the way back up on top again. And so we have many clients that will just
and that doesn't, like, we don't have liquid at the bottom. Yeah, I was going to say the drainage port helps a lot. We have like containers where we collect the liquid, so that actually gets out most of the liquid.
Are you draining continuously, or do you?
Yeah, we just have like these oil containers, I guess, for when you change out the oil in your car, and we have them. We have low ones that go under the tote and just catch everything.
Yeah, and one of the things we've added to earth cubes now is garden hose adapters as a standard item for earth cubes, so that you can just attach a garden hose and run that liquid to a container. As long as it's below the level of your cube, you don't need a pump to move that liquid. But keeping that liquid out of there is super important. Any excess liquids, to keep that material from going into an anaerobic composting. But often I'll find the same thing. I'll dig down and the bottom 6 inches is pretty wet. So I'll just add more bulking agent to that material, leave it in the vessel, and just, you know, mix that in, as opposed to taking that material out.
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay, this is a time check. We've only got a couple of minutes, and we've got a couple of people here. I think Ryan Torres is here and Jay Worth is here. They also use the earth cube, and they probably have different takes on it and use it in different ways. So what we're going to do is, on February 17th, we're getting back together again, and we're going to discuss all this in more detail. Is that okay with you, Van and
Absolutely.
Stephanie and Ryan? Could you be there on the 17th?
Yes, I can.